Hello and welcome to the channel. So today we're going to be looking at evaluative writing for GCSE English Language. So today on YouTube, what I'm going to be going through is how to approach evaluative writing, what it is, how to analyse and be evaluative. And we're going to look at an example text, annotate it as you would in the exam, and then perhaps we're going to answer part of a question as well as if we were in an exam. In all of my previous videos, I've advertised my Patreon. I'm moving away from Patreon now, so all of my resources are still on Patreon. So the ones that I've done so far are still up there, and you can purchase those from Patreon. But I'm not going to be putting any new content on Patreon. So now all worksheets that I'm creating, I'm going to be putting on TES and then as part of wider courses. So all of the worksheets that I have put on Patreon, however, are also on TES, as well as the full course that I've created for English Language GCSE. And then in time, there will also be one for maths, but we've got a lot more content to go through for the maths before we can create that larger course. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to have a look at the key elements of evaluative writing, and then we're going to have a go at attempting an evaluative writing question based on an extract. Okay, so here we go. So if we can get in our notebooks today's title, which is evaluative writing. Today's date for me is the 13th of November 2025. I would advise writing the date that it is for you on whatever day you're doing this, because what that does is it allows you to keep track of when you've done the work, and then when you look back and revise, you can keep track on the work you've been doing there. Okay, so evaluative writing, essentially, if I were to just pin it down into one sentence, is the skill, or it requires the skill. So I'll start it off with this as a sentence. So evaluative writing is the skill of deciding and analysing how well a writer has achieved an effect in their writing. So it's not just identifying what the effect is, it's evaluating how well they've achieved that and how they have then achieved that. Now, essentially at GCSE, the crux of the difference between evaluative writing and analytical writing is making sure that we are speaking evaluatively. So speaking as though we are aware that we understand we are evaluating somebody else's work. And so there's an element of judgment there, there's an element of opinion. You've got to show what you really think. Okay, so the key for this question really is showing how far you agree with a statement, and then justifying that opinion. Okay, so when answering a question like this, you will be given a statement and you must decide how far you agree, make this clear, and be able to evidence this. So in the exam board that I'm framing this course around, the question that is evaluative will give you a statement and you have to decide, do I agree with that or not? Now, the question will always be aimed, and the statement will always be aimed at it being most easy to agree. So you're not going to want to disagree with it. If you disagree with the statement, you've then got to come up with a whole new counter statement of what the writer actually does do well. Because the statement will often say something like, in this part of the extract, the writer very effectively creates a sense of danger and uncomfortable and an uncomfortable feeling. And they've written that because it's true, essentially. So you can decide to completely agree, or you can agree partially and then perhaps have an idea of what else they're doing instead. But what you can't do is just say, no, I completely disagree, it's a rubbish piece of writing, because you're not going to get any marks for that. You need to look at the mark scheme and understand that you're getting the marks from actually analysing and evaluating what is there and talking about why it is successful, not why it's unsuccessful. Okay, the other crucial thing is that you need to use evaluative adverbs, okay? And what that means is that as you write your analysis, you're peppering through some terminology that sounds like you're assessing the writer. So you'd use things like successfully, evidently, brilliantly, subtly, wonderfully. So positive adverbs that show how well the writer has achieved this specific thing. Okay. Beyond that, evaluative writing is essentially analysis, and we've been through analysis in other videos. If you want to look at the crux of language analysis, then go and visit some of my other videos about that. That's what we're doing, with added understanding that this is our opinion, and therefore we've got to frame it like an opinion. Okay. Right, okay, so let's have a look at the extract itself. So I'm going to scroll back up here. Now, the question asks us to look from the dragon circled once. So here we go. It's a very short extract in this case. The extract that you'll get in the exam will be much longer than this whole thing anyway. Well, not much longer, but about half again longer. But perhaps the section that you look at might not be any longer than this. So this is the section that we're looking at here with our question in mind. So I'm going to have a little read through, and then we're going to have a little bit of annotation, and I'm going to show you how you might turn this into an evaluative answer. So, the dragon circled once, then dropped. Its landing cracked the earth. Roofs shuddered. Windows shattered. Fire bloomed from its throat, a ribbon of destruction. The bakery ignited. The bell tower crumbled. Ellen shielded her face, the heat clawing at her skin. She turned to run, but stopped. A child, no older than 6, stood alone by the fountain, sobbing. The dragon reared back, preparing another blast. Ellen sprinted. Her lantern fell. Her cloak tore. She reached the child and threw her arms around him. The fire came, but not to them. The dragon paused, its head tilted. It growled, low and curious. Ellen met its gaze. Her voice trembled, but she spoke. "We are not your enemy." Silence. Then, with a gust of wind and a final snarl, the dragon launched skyward, vanishing into the clouds. The village smouldered, but Ellen stood, child in arms, eyes fixed on the sky. Okay, good, well done. I don't know why I'm saying well done. I'm congratulating myself for reading it. Well done. So, I would say that I more or less agree with the statements. The statement says that the dragon seems terrifying at first, which indeed it does. We've got some evidence for that. But the writer makes it seem less threatening as Ellen's bravery becomes a real focus. So actually, I'm going to decide in this case, because there's no point in trying to find a disagreement where there isn't one, that I completely agree with the statement. And I'm actually going to decide to split my response into 3 sections. Now, generally speaking, your structure for this question is going to be a small introduction, 3 main paragraphs, and a small conclusion. So my 3 main paragraphs, which are going to be my analytical paragraphs, are going to include something about the dragon being terrifying at first, then how he seems less threatening, and then how actually it's Ellen's bravery that is the real focus. So those are my 3 points throughout this text. So what that means is I'm going to have to find a piece of evidence for each of those. So let me grab my highlighter. So something from the beginning that tells me that the dragon is really terrifying at first. I think I'm going to go for this sentence here. So fire bloomed from its throat, a ribbon of destruction. Okay. So this here is a metaphor. So what I initially want to do when I annotate is to identify the technique. Now bear in mind that this evaluation question wants you to look at language and structure. So throughout this, I'm going to make sure that I don't just talk about language devices. I'm going to bring up structure as well. And what this metaphor does is it makes something small, I think, because the fire coming out of its throat is like a ribbon. So actually the ribbon itself seems quite insignificant in comparison to the size of the dragon. Even the smallest thing about the dragon or the most insignificant thing, like a ribbon, is destructive. But I suppose what you could also say about the ribbon is that you can't control where it flows, so it would just fall where it may. So it's quite a fluid image, so I suppose it could go anywhere. So danger as fire seems random and could go anywhere, and the fact that it is of destruction suggests that that's its only purpose. So only there to destroy. There's no other option, which makes it a terrifying, threatening creature. Okay, so the point where it actually starts to become slightly less intimidating is where it tilts its head. So I'm just going to take this this line here. The dragon paused. Its head tilted. It growled, low and curious. So I'm going to talk structurally here about the short sentences. Those short sentences in this context, because there's not a lot happening in the short sentences, it slows the narrative so it feels less frantic, I think. Less frantic. And also, if we think about characterization, so it's actually characterizing the dragon as having some kind of understanding, right? So he isn't just a destructive creature that only thinks about fire and death. He actually has some thought, okay? So he's now thought of as a little bit thoughtful. He's clever, perhaps. Not just destructive. So he can control himself. It shows that there is control there. Whereas in our first point, we're showing that actually this ribbon, because it's random, it feels like there's no control. And he can't control what's going on, and so it makes it even more threatening. Okay, and then at the end, where Ellen seems super duper brave, I think maybe here. Again, there's some structural stuff going on here, I think. So the use of the dialogue, I think, shows authority. She feels that she can stand up to the dragon. Although this verb suggests that actually she is scared. The use of the conjunction here shows that she is choosing action over giving in to her fear. Choosing action. Again, I apologise for the pen here. It's really difficult to write with on here, but I'm going to interpret all of this into paragraphs anyway, so you'll be able to see it. Okay, cool. So you can see how I've peppered in language and structure here. I've got metaphor, short sentences, characterization, conjunctions, verb. So more structure actually, which is fairly unusual than language. Okay. Right, now what I'm going to do is I might actually just copy that onto a fresh page down here so I can turn this into a response. Now, as we go in these videos, it might be a good idea to pause and make your own annotations and see how they compare to mine when you continue to play the video. So you might want to decide to pause the video here and have a go at interpreting, or indeed pause it where I've actually got the annotations up, and have a go at writing your own answers, and then seeing how they compare to mine in a moment. That might be a good way of doing it, and also seeing if you can spot anything else that you might pick in place of some of the things that I've said. But for now, I'm going to turn this into a paragraph, so I'm actually going to copy this here so I can start the question under here. Now, as I said before, what I want to start with is an introduction. So I need to make sure in my introduction I'm using the words from the statement. And I'm going to specify how far I agree. So I completely agree with the statement in that the dragon does indeed seem terrifying at first. Now, in my introduction, I'm going to pepper in some of the ideas that I'm actually going to bring up later in the essay. I'm not going to go into full explanation, but just kind of hinting at some things that I'm going to say as my reasoning. As he seems out of control and entirely destructive. As the text moves on, however, the dragon becomes less scary as he is shown to be intelligent enough to consider his actions. After this, Ellen's bravery becomes a focus. Although she is still scared, she stands up to the dragon anyway. There you go. So that's my overall summary of what's going on, which has served as my introduction. So I now move on to my first paragraph. So I'm going to do some analysis as I've done before. I'm going to decide this time to start with my technique. So I'm going to say, firstly, the writer uses a metaphor in the line, fire bloomed from its throat. A ribbon of destruction. In order to show how the only purpose for the dragon's fire is to destroy. This is what it is made for. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in on the use of the word ribbon to make some of my other points. So what I've not done in my annotation is single word analysis, which is what we generally want to do. I've done a little bit of it near the end there, but with single word analysis you kind of access that potentially the top marks as you're doing more detailed analysis. The only purpose for the dragon's fire is to destroy. This is what it is made for. In particular, the noun ribbon creates an image of a flowing object that the movements of which cannot be controlled. This makes the fire seem more terrifying and threatening because the movements of it feel random and could destroy anything. Okay, there we go, first paragraph done. Doesn't look a lot on the screen, but actually when you write that down in a response in an exam, it is much more, it looks like much more. Okay, so now I move on to my second one. So, as the text progresses, the writer uses short sentences in the line. The dragon paused. Its head tilted. It growled low and curious. in order to show, now look back at what I've done on my annotation here, shows the narrative is less frantic. Okay. In fact, I'm going to add up here, uses short sentences at a moment of stillness. So that's why the short sentences are feeling less frantic, because there's no action happening, right? If it's quick action and therefore it's short sentences, that actually makes the pacing faster. So when there's nothing happening but you get continual short sentences, the pacing is slowed. But when there's lots happening and you get that in short sentences, the pacing is increased. So it can go either way depending on what's happening in the text. So there's not a lot happening here. It's just a moment of contemplation for the dragon. In order to show that the dragon, or in order to slow the pacing of the text to demonstrate the moment of contemplation that is taking place for the dragon. This shows us that the dragon is capable of thinking more critically about his actions and has more control than we first thought. This makes him seem less erratic and destructive. And then I can choose to do some single word analysis if I want to. So I might choose curious. So furthermore, the use of the adjective curious shows that his interest in Ellen is not simply to harm her, but he is interested in her actions in a purely innocent way. Okay, cool. And then finally, we say Ellen's talk about Ellen's bravery. Now, I didn't actually mention the word characterization in here, which I absolutely could have done. So I could say here, characterizes the dragon as capable of thinking more critically about his actions, having more control than we first thought. There we go. So just using that word characterizes, I'm analysing structure. Cool. Last one. Finally, as the source comes to an end, the writer uses dialogue in the line Ellen met its gaze. Her voice trembled. Actually, I might just go from her voice trembled because I don't talk about this first bit, so it's kind of irrelevant. Her voice trembled. It's a good habit to get into in the exam. Don't quote loads and loads and loads if you're only talking about a bit of it. Try and just quote what you're talking about, because otherwise you're going to waste time copying quotes down. So her voice trembled, but she spoke. We're not your enemy. Okay. In order, I'll just say, this shows that, now what did I write down here? Ellen feels that she has authority enough over the dragon to speak to it. This shows both her bravery and the lack of threat the dragon is posing at the end simultaneously. And then I might zoom in on some other stuff. So the verb trembled followed by the conjunction but in but she spoke shows that Ellen is certainly frightened, but she is choosing action over giving into her fear, which demonstrates her bravery. There we go. Lovely. And then I will finish it off by doing a conclusion, which is more or less a repetition of my introduction, but I might bring in more stuff that I've mentioned throughout the essay. So I can say, to conclude, the student is absolutely right that the dragon is presented as terrifying at the beginning, as it is dangerous and out of control. It does develop a more contemplative character throughout, however, making it less immediately terrifying. Finally, the student is also right that Ellen's bravery is the focus at the end, as we are shown her choice to act is successful in spite of her initial fear. Okay, now, what I haven't done, well, I'm going to challenge you to think about what I haven't done. There's something I haven't done in this that I should have done, that I told you all to do right at the beginning of this video. And what that is using evaluative adverbs. I haven't done any of that. Now, you'll be surprised about how much more evaluative this is going to sound when I add these in. So I'm just going to pepper them in where I should have put them in the first place. So I'll start from the beginning. I completely agree with the statement that the dragon does indeed seem terrifying. I might actually not put them in the introduction or conclusion. I'm going to save them for my analysis paragraphs. Now, I'm just going to use it every time I mention a technique the writer is using. So firstly, the writer successfully uses a metaphor in the line, blah, blah, blah. In particular, the subtle use of the noun ribbon. Now, subtle is not technically an adverb, but it's an adjective that's showing how well I think the writer's done here. The writer cleverly uses short sentences. Skillful characterization shows the dragon to be. I'll change that. How do you spell skillful then? Okay. One L all the way through. Skillful characterization shows the dragon to be capable of thinking more critically. Furthermore, the brilliant use there we go. The writer wonderfully uses dialogue. And then I think I'll leave it there because I could use more, but I've used quite a few there. Right, I'm going to reread the answer. And I just want you to listen to how effective the adverbs are at making this evaluative. Okay. I completely agree with the statement in that the dragon does indeed seem terrifying at first, as he seems out of control and entirely destructive. As the text moves on, however, the dragon becomes less scary as he is shown to be intelligent enough to consider his actions. After this, Ellen's bravery becomes a focus. Although she is still scared, she stands up to the dragon anyway. Firstly, the writer successfully uses a metaphor in the line "fire bloomed from its throat, a ribbon of destruction," in order to show how the only purpose for the dragon's fire is to destroy. This is what it is made for. In particular, the subtle use of the noun ribbon creates an image of a flowing object, the movements of which cannot be controlled. This makes the fire seem more terrifying and threatening because the movements of it feel random and could destroy anything. As the text progresses, the writer cleverly uses short sentences at a moment of stillness. In the line, the dragon paused, its head tilted, it growled low and curious, in order to slow the pacing of the text to demonstrate the moment of contemplation that is taking place for the dragon. Skillful characterization shows the dragon to be capable of thinking more critically about his actions, having more control than we first thought. This makes him seem erratic and destructive. Furthermore, the brilliant use of the adjective curious shows that his interest in Ellen is not simply to harm her, but he is interested in her actions in a purely innocent way. Finally, as the source comes to an end, the writer wonderfully uses dialogue in the line, "Her voice trembled, but she spoke, 'We're not your enemy.' This shows that Ellen feels that she has authority enough over the dragon to speak to it. This shows both bravery and the lack of threat the dragon is posing at the end simultaneously. The verb trembled, followed by the conjunction but, in but she spoke, shows that Ellen is certainly frightened, but she is choosing action over giving in to her fear, which demonstrates her bravery. To conclude, the student is absolutely right that the dragon is presented as terrifying in the beginning, as it is dangerous and out of control. It does develop a more contemplative character throughout, however, making it less immediately terrifying. Finally, the student is also right that Ellen's bravery is the focus at the end, as we have shown her choice to act is successful in spite of her initial fear. Okay, so there you have it. So that's the top answer. We've analysed throughout, we've found language and structure techniques. We've zoomed in on some more detailed parts of each quote. We have evaluated in the use of evaluative adjectives and adverbs. And we've structured the essay well in that we've got an introduction and conclusion, and then 3 main analytical paragraphs throughout that each have a separate point. So there you have it. That is an evaluative answer. So thank you very much for joining me on YouTube. Please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. I'm going to be moving on to maths. So although there's some English lessons to look back on, the new ones that are going to be coming out are probably going to be more maths focused. I think we've come to the end now of our main stint with English. We will return to English, but I want to get some more content done for maths as well. Okay, so thank you very much for joining me. I'll see you next time. Have a lovely day.